Sometimes revealing a secret or exposing wrongdoing can do more harm than good, but this wouldn't be enough to dissuade some brave individuals. Those courageous characters, though, would find themselves paying a dire price for their truth-telling habits. Number 10. Jean-Pascal Cororo, or JPK for short, was a much-loved man among family members and within his workforce until his dismissal in 1988. He was working as the editor-in-chief for a French daily journal. During his time in this position, JPK spent a significant amount of time investigating some controversial topics, one of which focused on the political and financial dealings within the local government. For years, the writer would publish some seriously critical stories. Those publications were often directed at one individual in particular, Gaston Flosse. Known locally as the Old Lion, Gaston Flosse served as the French Polynesian president at a time when nuclear testing was resumed in the atolls of Moruroa and Fangataufa. Even after his dismissal from the Daily Journal, JPK wouldn't let up, and allegedly an assistant to a member of the opposition, he would continue to investigate those seemingly covert dealings. It didn't take long, of course, for the writer to accumulate several enemies, most of whom held elite power. JPK's investigations ran so deep that President Flosse ordered the Department of Studies and Documentation to spy on him. The intelligence unit would then order the GIP, or the Presidential Intervention Group, to keep a close watch on the writer too. The spying would only become exacerbated when JPK began looking into the link between Flosse and French President Jacques Chirac. During his investigative efforts, it appeared that the journalist stumbled upon something sensitive. It was, allegedly, a 12 to 13 page long document that held confidential information. According to a supposed Secret Service report, while JPK was looking into Tahiti financing, he discovered a portion of the money was going to Japan. When inquiring further about why this money was being allocated to Japan, the investigator was asked to stop and not to head in that direction. On the 15th of December, 1997, JPK would mysteriously disappear, never to be seen again. His vanishing came at a time during which he was possibly onto something big, something that was perhaps meant to stay hidden. Following his disappearance, JPK's investigative work would come to light, leading authorities to investigate the alleged money that was being sent to Japan. But they couldn't find any bank account in Japan that was linked to Flosse or Chirac. Law enforcement would be left with a chilling mystery and would attempt to investigate it from all angles, from kidnapping to homicide. For the next several years, the mystery would stir allegations, counterclaims, and even charges of homicide, which were eventually dropped. In 2004, a member of the GIP, Vitea Guiu, would make a serious allegation to an investigating judge. He claimed that on behalf of the Department of Studies and Documentation, he spied on JPK. He would then suggest that two of his GIP colleagues would take the writer's life, but he quickly retracted that statement. The missing man's family refused to give up, and upon hearing that alarming confession, they filed a complaint, hoping to keep the case alive. In 2013, Guiu would make the same statement again and tell a harrowing story of what happened that fateful evening. According to him, GIP members pursued and seized the journalist, forcing him to climb into a small boat. They took him out into the middle of a body of water where they thoroughly interrogated him. It seemed as though things got out of hand, with Guiu claiming that the man that they were interrogating accidentally drowned. Despite this claim, JPK's body was never found, leaving his allegation made by the GIP unsubstantiated. Number 9. Farad Hamo, a freelance writer for the Kurdish broadcaster known as Rudal TV, and his colleague, a freelance cameraman known as Masoud Akil, headed to the northern Syrian town of Tel Alo in December of 2014. The two were working on a joint case, the nature of which remains unclear. Their visit to the town would include an interview with the political leader, but this interview would never take place. Before they could even reach the town, the vehicle transporting the co-workers abruptly stopped and was suddenly surrounded by men. The group was loaded with assault rifles, explosive belts, and other dangerous tools. Their mere presence was a clear and obvious threat. Hamo and Akil quickly identified themselves, stating they were journalists and would be interviewing a political leader, but it was for this very reason that the men had stopped them. One of the armed individuals climbed into the car and took their phones. He then drew a firearm and ordered them to drive to Tel Hamis, a nearby town. They did as they were told. Eventually, they arrived at a school building where 2 other militants examined their devices, phones, and laptops. Then they escorted the 2 journalists to Tamis prison. On the 16th of December, an Islamic State Sharia court ordered that they be sent to Shadadaya jail for 40 days, and later Raqqa's central prison, to be placed in solitary confinement. Allegedly, this was all at the behest of the Islamic State leader, Abu Ayyub. In March of the following year, Akil watched as Hamo was taken away from the prison and never saw him again. The cameraman was later released in a prisoner exchange and was able to give authorities information on Hamo's whereabouts until that point. Later that year, Ruda TV reported that Hamo had also been released, but altered their statement to say that the man was still missing. Minor investigations and inquiries were made into the disappearance, but ultimately nothing could be done. With law enforcement not doing much to confirm the whereabouts of Farad Hamo, Aras, his brother, took matters into his own hands. Aras also worked as a cameraman for Ruda and headed to the eastern Syrian village of Baghuz in search of his brother. It was here that the Islamic State was making its last stand in the area. The brother of the missing man was led here after hearing about captives and hostages of the Islamic State being jailed in Baghuz. Through his efforts, Aras would find clues that suggested his brother was alive. With no evidence or confirmation on Hamo's whereabouts, the case was doomed to be a mystery forever. In 2019, Syrian Democratic Forces retook the village, and a month later, it was revealed that forces within the town were on the hunt for the missing journalist, as well as other hostages. As of 2025, though, Hamo remains missing, and the family is fearing the worst. Whatever case the freelancers were working on, it was certainly one that was intended to be kept from the public eye. Number 8. The silence is haunting in the home of Anna Pinoni, the one she once shared with her husband, Azori Guanda. Her muted cry, though, unheard by most, continues into the night as she remembers that fateful day, the day she was robbed of her beloved husband. Azori was living on a farm near Kibiti, Tanzania, with his wife. In 2017, the 45-year-old was working as a freelance journalist at Mwanachi Communication Limited. That year, he'd been focusing on one particular developing story that had been plaguing the coastal region of Pwani. Since 2015, unknown assailants had begun a spate of homicides, mainly carried out through the use of firearms. Azori began investigating the slew of slaughter and found that the districts of Kibiti, Karenga, and Rufiji were at the epicenter of the crimes. It was this harrowing mystery that Azori was attempting to bring to light, but unbeknownst to him, danger lurked in the shadows. As he became more engaged in his investigation into the mysterious homicides, the journalist would enigmatically disappear. It was November when Anna headed to the local police station to report her husband missing. She watched as he climbed into a white Toyota Land Cruiser that stopped in front of their home. There were unknown men inside, and Azori claimed he was leaving on emergency business. The car drove off, leaving questions in its wake. When Anna later returned to her home, she found it ransacked, indicative of a thorough search. The journalist had allegedly been approached previously by the same strange men. The Tanzanian government and authorities failed to provide any answers to the questions. In fact, they weren't even looking for him. According to several sources, the government failed to carry out a proper investigation and occasionally dismissed the case altogether when asked about it. Activists were understandably dissatisfied with how things had progressed in the case and demanded answers by using hashtags like "Where is Azori?" and "Bring back Azori." They continued to mark his disappearance for the first 100 days, but authorities still couldn't provide closure. They suggested that Azori may have just gotten lost. They claimed that Azori may have just gotten lost and claimed that investigations were underway. In recent years, the Tanzanian government has cracked down on the media, shutting down private radio stations, newspapers, and even raiding and fining television stations that report critically on the government. Adding to this are several arrests of journalists who cover public events, or in Azori's case, investigate serious human rights violations. Despite the public's plea to investigate the disappearance, it remains unsolved. Number 7. Where is Laura Lee Wilsey? This is the question plaguing the collective minds of the West Palm Beach, Florida inhabitants. It was 2024 when Laura was renting a home on Garden Avenue, in which she shared with a man named Todd Arthur Reichert. The two had started off as roommates, but as time went on, Laura found herself becoming a police informant. Law enforcement was in the process of gathering evidence against 3 individuals for a burglary case. One of the suspects was Reichert. The 2 other men were also known to Laura: Michael Oler, her boyfriend at the time, and Timothy Smith. The roommate, though, had other charges pending against him. Reichert seemingly had a host of crimes linked to him, from weapons violations to domestic violence, and even aggravated assault. These convictions were found to be littered across at least 2 states. It appeared that Laura had been a witness to the alleged burglary and was recruited by the law, to which she happily obliged. While she agreed to uncover necessary evidence for them, law enforcement failed to protect her in return, because not long after she became an informant, and Laura would mysteriously vanish. The Rhode Island native was 56 years old when one of her 3 children reported her missing on the 30th of July, 2024. An investigation promptly ensued to track down the informant as quickly as possible, with police realizing they had no measure in place to protect their mole. It didn't take long for investigators to learn about the harrowing last few hours that Laura was subjected to before her disappearance. Security footage from the evening of the 29th of July revealed a volatile argument taking place between Reichert, Smith, Laura, and a man named Todd Arthur. The argument was nothing short of disturbing and ended with Reichert dragging Laura around as she resisted. Neighbors of Garden Avenue would also make crucial allegations. After the argument was captured on security camera, it appeared that the 2 roommates headed back to their home. It was here that neighbors could hear the suspect assaulting Laura. They also heard the sound of trash bags crumpling underfoot. Reichert would then allegedly tell a witness that he was heading to Belle Glade and that he wasn't taking his cell phone with him in an effort to avoid being tracked. The man would leave in his 2010 Volkswagen and return 2.5 hours later. After Laura was reported missing by her daughter, police headed over to the house to investigate. There, they would find her cell phone and medication, items that her children insist she would never leave home without. Detectives secured a search warrant, allowing them to search Reichert's vehicle, where they found vital fluid confirmed to have belonged to Laura. It was suspected that somehow the suspect had uncovered the informant's scheme and decided to silence her, but there was still something crucial missing, and that was the body of Laura Wilsey. While Reichert was being booked into jail for several felonies, the family was happy to have some sort of justice, but closure was what they really wanted. There were still no clues as to what happened to Laura. Her fate remained unknown, and so did her whereabouts. A month after he was jailed for burglary charges, Reichert was heard telling Oler that Laura was unfaithful and was nothing more than collateral damage, and that she had to be taken care of. With no protection for the informant being established as she fed secrets to the police, Reichert wasn't the only one who viewed Laura as collateral damage. Despite public appeals, her case remains unsolved. Number 6. It was the 17th of March, 2007, in southern Kazakhstan, when violent clashes between Chechens and Kazakhs were underway in the villages of both Malovodnoy and Kazakhstan. It was the day that hundreds of infuriated Kazakhs tore up the property belonging to the Makhmakhanov family. They would also slaughter 3 of the family members. According to the official account, they had surrounded the home, demanding an explanation for an alleged altercation that had occurred the previous evening. The disagreement was between Tahir, the youngest Makhmakhanov brother, and a Kazakh, in which the former supposedly fired at and wounded a young Kazakh. When the Makhmakhanov brothers refused to offer an explanation or come out of the house, instead they opened fire from the windows, claiming the lives of 2 Kazakhs and wounding another 9. This only angered them further, causing a retaliation that saw 3 of the brothers slain and the building set alight. Of course, there was bound to be loads of media coverage on the unfolding dilemma, but most of the reports focused on one main aspect: the violence of one ethnic group against another. 39-year-old Oral Geisha Omar Shanova, a reporter from the Russian Kazakh weekly paper called Law and Justice, focused on a new and controversial set of questions. She had traveled to the Almaty region that March to cover the story of the violent clash, where she would bring about another question. How did the fourth brother, Vida, come to be in the house at the time of the attack, and why wasn't his life taken too? Vida was being held under investigation for the alleged homicide of influential businessman Sagit Shakhbutov, which took place more than 700 kilometers away. Oral Geisha wondered why he was released and returned to his family home. Adding to her newly posed set of questions was the response of the local police. The standoff had lasted several hours, making it impossible for the police not to hear the shouting or the hail of bullets. The journalist began to wonder why they didn't intervene, and if there was some sort of plan to have Vida slain in the crossfire. Oral Geisha had written about the Shakhbutov assassination and even knew the name of the main suspect. In February, prior to the violent clash, she had outlined her theory about why the businessman was slain, citing previous media claims that painted the man as a criminal. Following the Chechens and Kazakhs incident, Oral Geisha would publish another article, again outlining her theory on what happened there. She highlighted how one of the members of the Chechens who were attacked were suspects in the slaying of Shakhbutov. The journalist also noted that another of the brothers, Amir, had ties to Kazakh mice, and that the eldest of them all was a member of the board of judges. It seemed that Oral Geisha was making connections that she shouldn't have been. At the end of March, she traveled to the Almaty region to investigate further, and was able to secure a ride there on the 30th of March. She was last seen getting into a vehicle. She never arrived at her destination, and she's not been heard from since. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, the journalist had received telephone threats ordering her to stop reporting on the matter. Eager to uncover a sinister plot, she did not heed the warnings. Number 5. Angie Denise Tucker, devoted mother, reliable employee, and someone whom everyone could depend on. This is the brief description that accompanies the tragic story that haunts the Tulsa, Oklahoma community. No one knows how it happened or why, but that evening back in 2007 was one that no one would forget. It was the 3rd of November when Angie, an employee at the Oklahoma State University Medical Center, was staying with her mother at Apache Street and Yale Avenue, accompanied by her 2 children. Around 11:30 that evening, Angie told her mother that she was just heading out to buy some cigarettes. Little did they know that this would be the last time they saw each other. The 30-year-old stepped out of the home and right into the void. She never returned and wasn't seen or heard from again. She didn't own a vehicle at the time, and her disappearance was marked as completely out of character. Angie loved her children and certainly wouldn't have willingly left them behind. What makes her story all the more frightening was the month-long lead-up. Just 1 month before she disappeared, Angie would accuse her former partner, Alan Shields, of breaking into her apartment and assaulting her. She claimed that in the early hours of the 6th of October, she awoke to find Shields in her home. Allegedly, Angie didn't let him in, and he had instead forced his way inside. He then supposedly proceeded to assault her and then fled the scene. Angie reported the incident, and Shields was promptly arrested for burglary and assault. As a trial date was being set, she managed to obtain a restraining order against him. Shields was able to post bond and was released the very next day he was arrested. A month later, just before she was due to testify, Angie would mysteriously disappear. Her ex-boyfriend, of course, was immediately considered a person of interest, though he maintained his innocence, claiming he had no knowledge of where she was or what may have happened to her. It was clear, though, he had a motive. Angie had accused him of something major, and she was about to solidify those claims in court. The charges against Shields were also dropped due to the missing victim and lack of evidence, while family and friends appealed to the public for information, hoping that someone saw something. But it seemed that whatever happened that fateful evening was done in the darkness, hidden from the public eye. A favorable outcome in Angie's disappearance was further weakened when Shields was arrested a second time in 2010. It was February when he was apprehended, and charged with 5 felonies. Those charges included kidnapping, assault, and burglary. It appeared that he had entered his ex-girlfriend's home with a kidnap kit consisting of narcotics, pepper spray, disinfectant wipes, handcuffs, a mask, and a firearm. According to police, he entered the home and waited a whole 13 hours for the victim to come home. The woman's daughter managed to contact authorities, whose timely arrival prevented a homicide. Following these charges, Angie's case would receive renewed interest as it remained unsolved. Authorities noted several similarities in both cases. Both partnerships ended bitterly, and both women were forced to take out protection orders against Shields, who would also go on to hold the second victim's daughter hostage. His life would end in a standoff with police, who were responding to the hostage case, preventing all chances of closing Angie's case, which is still an open investigation. Number 4. What happened to Gene Bajirman? A question that still has family and colleagues on edge. It's been several years since he mysteriously vanished, and those who knew him are now fearing the worst. Not much is known about Gene's personal life or history, aside from being a former employee of the pro-government radio station known as Rima FM. In 2016, though, he was working as a reporter for the independent weekly newspaper called Iwachu and was living in East Africa. It was around lunchtime on the 22nd of July that year when Gene left his home. He allegedly received a phone call from a source within the country's national intelligence service, leading him to walk out of his house. Upon his departure, Gene assured his wife that he would be back soon, but he never returned. His sudden disappearance came just weeks after he returned from Rwanda, where he had done a journalism training course. It also came not long after he had allegedly written an article regarding the life of exiled Burundian journalists who were living in Rwanda. Not long after the suspicious disappearance, Iwachu claimed that they received a phone call from a woman who said she was a friend of, quote, the journalist. She stated that Gene was detained by supposed intelligence agents due to the article that he was said to have written. Investigations were made into this claim by the CPJ, which found no evidence that the journalist was arrested. With unnamed sources, Iwachu would also claim that their colleague was being held at an intelligence facility. According to the report, he was being subjected to extreme beatings and was starving. Iwachu's director, Antoine Cabaret, would later tell CPJ that the president of Burundi's National Human Rights Commission visited the area where Gene was alleged to have been detained by intelligence officials. The president returned to the capital and canceled a press conference regarding Gene's disappearance, claiming that he was still investigating. A few days later, CNIDH said that they couldn't find the missing man and had no information on his whereabouts. They also couldn't find the alleged intelligence facility in Morambia. Iwachu journalists, Gene's colleagues, were not pleased with this result and decided to conduct their own investigation into the disappearance. They searched for him in the province, following leads from several sources. During their investigation, they came across 2 bodies that were dumped in a river, initially believing that Gene was among them. The bodies were left unidentified and quickly buried, leaving this theory unconfirmed. It's been almost 10 years now since Gene vanished, and we're no closer to answers. Number 3. Sidney Riley was a man of mystery, which would inevitably make him famous. His passion, obfuscation, betrayal, and lying about his life made him all the more intriguing. The exact date of his birth remains in question, and his true name is a topic of controversy. Only one thing was certain about Riley. He was a double-crossing spy. This Russian-born man would become known as the Ace of Spies, serving as inspiration to novelists across the world. His early adulthood, though, would consist of a romanticized journey, most of which appeared to be of his own invention. According to him, Riley had studied chemistry in Vienna for 3 years before heading to Brazil, where he would befriend British Army officers in the Amazon. From there, he would be recommended to London's British intelligence, where he allegedly changed his first name from Sidney to George. The adventurous man soon found himself working as a secret agent for Scotland Yard's Special Branch, and was later absorbed into the foreign section of the British Secret Service Bureau, the forerunner of MI6. It was during his affiliation with the Secret Service that he would begin his spying endeavors, But he wouldn't stay loyal to just one great power. Instead, Riley would do secret spy work for at least 4 great powers. Evidence also suggests that he was engaged in some espionage activities in London among the Russian migrant groups. He also allegedly went to Moscow with the intention of overthrowing the Bolshevik regime, but he was betrayed and forced to flee. During these ventures, Riley was also distributing one country's secrets to another. His first assignment under the employment of Scotland Yard's special branch was to establish the extent of the Russian oil reserves in Baku. After successfully completing this espionage job, Riley became a shipping agent. This time, he was playing for higher stakes and served as a double agent for both England and the Japanese. On board the vessel for Port Arthur, Riley, in disguise and accompanied by an engineer acquaintance, was able to swiftly steal the Port Arthur harbor defense plans at the instruction of the Japanese Navy. Guided by the secret plans, the Navy was able to successfully navigate through the Russian minefield that had been protecting the harbor. The stolen documents allowed them to launch a surprise attack on the port and destroy the Russian fleet that was anchored there. Riley's next disguise would be as a Catholic priest in Paris, where he would become a key figure in what would become known as the Darcy Affair. Darcy was an oil engineer who purchased the rights to the oil in the Middle East. He was then trying to sell the rights to the French in the form of the Rothschilds. Riley boarded the Rothschilds' yacht as a Catholic priest and covertly persuaded Darcy to terminate their negotiations and instead meet with the British Admiralty. Riley's espionage and spy activities wouldn't end there. He served as such for several great powers, changing the course of history as we know it. Although he may have thought otherwise, Riley wasn't untouchable. Eventually, his secret exposing activities would be his undoing. In September of 1925, for reasons unknown, Riley accepted an invitation to Russia, which had been sent to him by the Trust, a Soviet counterintelligence operation carried out by the Soviet secret police. Upon arriving in Moscow on the 27th of September, Riley sent a postcard to a colleague in the MI6, where he stated that everything was going well. After that postcard, though, no one would hear from him again. His whereabouts began to cause panic within the British Secret Service, and his face would dominate the front pages of newspapers for several days. Multiple attempts to determine what happened to him were made, but they were often proved futile. Eventually, the Bolsheviks would state that he'd been executed when trying to escape over the Finnish border, but the lack of a body and credible evidence caused skepticism, and thereafter several alleged sightings of him were rumored, but none were ever confirmed. Number 2. Mexico's history is marred by the homicides, imprisonment, and disappearances of journalists who report on matters that many would rather keep secret. More than 150 journalists in Mexico have been slain since the year 2000. Also marring the country is the unfortunate undermining of investigations among government officials, who appear to have a sort of collusion with the cartels. The case of Maria Esther Aguilar Casim is no different. Maria was living with her husband David Silva, the police chief and former public security director in Jacona. By 2007, Maria had been a journalist for 10 years and a police reporter for 4. She regularly found herself engaged with the criminal underworld, from organized crime to corruption present within the government. Her work would directly place her in harm's way, but Maria was smart. She would omit her name from the byline of articles, protecting not just herself but her family too. It was the 11th of November 2009 when Maria received a call from an unknown source, leading her to leave the house. Then she disappeared. All attempts to make contact with her after that failed. Making her case even more eerie was the lead up to that fateful day. A whole month before the disappearance, Maria was investigating a very serious and sensitive topic involving police abuse allegations and anti-cartel efforts carried out by the military. Just days before her disappearance, the journalist would also publish a story regarding the arrest of a narcotics trafficker, and had also written about 2 members of the family, a local crime organization. No more than 72 hours later, Maria was reported missing. An investigation into her disappearance discovered something truly disturbing. It appeared that some of her colleagues had been bribed by authorities and intimidated by other traffickers, forcing them to cease their investigative work. But Maria did not accept the bribes, nor did she take well to the intimidation. Instead, she continued to report on the developing story and wrote several sensitive articles. Despite the initial discoveries in the case, no new developments would present themselves in the weeks or months to follow. The Committee to Protect Journalists made contact with authorities in hopes of encouraging further investigation, but nothing ever came of it. According to the Attorney General's office, several reports regarding Maria's disappearance had been written, but her family insists that no one ever made contact with them regarding any developments. There had been no updates in the case, no clues, and no sightings since then. Maria had vanished. Each subsequent article repeated the same information, with nothing to add since 2009. Number 1. It was the morning of the 4th of August 2009 when television viewers in the city of Monterrey in Mexico were about to get more than they bargained for. They'd switched their television sets on, hoping to catch up with the news, when they were instead met with a disturbing scene. Pacing the front of a luxurious hotel, shouting through tears and distress, was a tall, slender woman wearing a red, ripped shirt. The woman was quickly recognized by onlookers. She was none other than Gabriella Rico Jimenez, a well-known model in Mexico, and she had some pretty chilling things to say. Through what could be made out from her shaking voice, a truly troubling story began to unfold. "They ate humans," she exclaimed. She pointed fingers at bystanders who seemingly worked at the hotel, screaming erratically. "I wasn't aware of anything," she claimed. "I mean about the homicide, yes," she continued. And it would only get more distressing from there. Gabriella was making some bizarre statements that all shared a common theme. Someone was eating humans. When law enforcement came to intervene, she resisted, stating that before they took her, this needs to be cleared up. Gabriella's uncharacteristic outburst followed an alleged party that she attended, but it wasn't just any old celebration. She'd been explicitly invited there by some very high-up, important figures. The young model made suggestions of cannibalism and accusations of human sacrifice, directing her claims at elites such as Carlos Slim, the business oligarch, as well as to members of European royalty, including Queen Elizabeth and even Disney. Through her ramblings, Gabriella announced that she'd been held captive for more than a year and revealed some distressing details of her time in captivity. Then, the fulminating ceased, and the young model was directed away. What would start off as a crazy display put on by an erratic woman would soon become an enduring enigma. Upon being forcibly removed from the premises, Gabriella disappeared and has not been seen or heard from since. An unconfirmed suggestion said that following the outburst, she was taken to a psychiatric facility, supposedly located in Buenos Aires. But there's little evidence to suggest this is where she is. Since Gabriella's suspicious disappearance, several theories have come about. Some say she was purposefully silenced by the elites, whom she accused of cannibalism and other barbaric acts, and others believe she was placed in witness protection, where she would remain as investigations were underway. But if the supposed elite figures were overseeing her removal, the latter would be less likely. The model's outburst and subsequent disappearance has never really been explained. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.